How to Make E.S.P Work for You by Harold Sherman. Recreation in electronic format by 8-Bit Download Publications. Your understanding of yourself, your mind, and how it operates will be greatly expanded when you read How to Make E.S.P Work for You by Harold Sherman. While much still remains to be discovered about the nature and functioning of extrasensory perception, as Harold Sherman, world-renowned lay authority on this subject, is first to admit, enough is now known to set forth certain mental techniques by which interested men and women can, through practice, learn to develop their own extrasensory powers. Mr. Sherman, in this exciting and revealing volume, has compiled his most outstanding, authenticated E.S.P experiences of a lifetime and has explained in simple, understandable detail just how he accomplished his own receiving and sending of impressions. It is Mr. Sherman's conviction that everyone possesses this sixth sense, impartially developed or undeveloped, born, and that anyone who faithfully practices the techniques he presents in time have some thrilling as well as evidential experiences. Many men and women who have read and studied other books of Mr. Sherman, such as Thoughts Through Space, TNT, The Power Within You, Know Your Own Mind, How to Use the Power of Prayer, Your Key to Happiness, and You Live After Death, and thousands of those who have attended Mr. Sherman's lectures have learned how to depend upon their intuition for everyday guidance and protection. How to Make E.S.P Work for You is regarded as a classic of its kind, the most complete, popular coverage of this subject from every standpoint, yet put between book covers. How to Make E.S.P Work for You. Harold Sherman, President and Executive Director, E.S.P Research Association Foundation, 1964, recreated in electronic format by 8-Bit Download Publications, Puerto Rico, USA, 2007. Introduction by Ivan Torres. For anybody who refuses to look upon E.S.P objectively, Harold Sherman's book should be an eye-opener. I could name hundreds of leading scientists, authors, economists, and respected public figures who no longer have any fundamental doubt that E.S.P exists. It is an innate power, but neither well understood nor liberated. There is no law in nature that would contradict it. On the contrary, it is an accepted scientific fact that every living cell is sensitive to a change in its surroundings, and no matter how microscopic this cell may be, it is still more complicated than the most advanced radio or television circuit. The reason we are always stressing the importance of our 5 physical senses is because their use is the most common and most obvious. E.S.P is an extension of our intelligence. Ivan Torres is an independent producer who has brought out 350 TV shows, mostly against scientific backgrounds. Among these have been The Man in the Challenge, Science Fiction Theater, and Sea Hunt, as well as the motion picture Flipper. While many of our scientists still refuse to take E.S.P perception seriously, Professor Vaslov of the University of Leningrad does, and he is conducting research in mental cerebral communication. If E.S.P could be understood and reproduced with drugs, hypnosis, or concentration, a great deal of deception could be eliminated because the minds of the leaders of aggressor nations could be monitored and dangerous actions forestalled. When I met Harold Sherman, I was provided with the living proof that communication can exist between human creatures without the written or spoken word. In 1959 and 1960, I was engaged in the production of a television series for NBC under the title of The Man in the Challenge. The show explored the limits of the human body and mind. One of the subjects I selected to explore was E.S.P. At that time, however, I was a disbeliever. For most of my shows, I used UCLA scientists as technical advisors, but for E.S.P studies, I had to go elsewhere. A friend of mine, a distinguished author, recommended that I read the book on the Wilkins Sherman long-distance telepathic experiment, Thoughts Through Space. I read the book cover to cover and was greatly impressed. I had a built-in respect for the pioneering and unprejudiced mind of Sir Hubert Wilkins, and now I wanted to meet Harold Sherman. Our first meeting at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel was a turning point in my life, with the result that today, my most important field of interest is research on psychological long-distance communication. During our luncheon, I tested Mr. Sherman's ability as a receiver of my thoughts. Of course, I didn't tell him about my little game. I willed him silently to start conversation on certain subjects of which I was thinking. His receptivity was incredible. Invariably, he picked up the desired subject in his conversation. Soon after this, a group of my friends and I tested Harold Sherman in the laboratory. The test took place January the 18th, 1960, in the presence of 3 medical doctors at Leslie LeCron, psychologist. Harold Sherman was placed in a small office with the doors closed. He remained there for 30 minutes to jot down his impressions, if any. He was not informed about what we planned to do in another remote office of the laboratory building. We left Sherman behind locked doors, and our group proceeded to its location. We closed the door, and Leslie LeCron placed me under a light degree of hypnosis. In this light trance, I was asked to relate everything I had done that day. It was a very unusual day, the start of a new film, and I had spent most of the day at sea. We dropped divers from a helicopter into the ocean and picked them up. We strapped a stuntman with machine gun bullets. A new portable air-to-sea communication was used for the first time. During the filming of this sequence, the machine gun jammed and I had to change the shooting schedule, which made me quite upset. The next sequence photographed was on a diving boat, equipped with a torpedo-like object, a portable decompression chamber. At this time, I had to take over the direction of the scene, and I was the only one present who actually had seen a decompression chamber in operation under emergency conditions. Treating the man who had the bends, and I had to instruct our very able director how to do it correctly. In the meantime, I ordered one of the seamen to throw a weighted line overboard with a marker to show our position for another scene. In the next sequence, we had to throw a small explosive charge overboard to signal to the divers with sound repercussions. While I was talking about these very complicated and technical scenes of which nobody there but myself could have had any knowledge, one of the doctors purposely inflicted pain upon me. He wanted to see whether Sherman would pick up the pain reaction. At another time, they stabbed the back of my hand with a needle and squeezed my right ear. 30 minutes later, we opened Harold Sherman's door. He had 4 pages of notes in front of him. 80% of his notes were correct to a fantastic degree. His notes read, shoes off foot, the bends, like a diver, strange boat equipment, human torpedo. Obviously referring to the decompression chamber sequence. Something wrong with apparatus. Shooting schedule changed. This is exactly what happened when the machine gun jammed. No, not that way. I'll show you. Let me do it. This is what I said to the director when I explained to him how the decompression chamber scene should be staged. Pain, left ear. Actually, the doctor pricked my right ear. Communication, sea to air. Divers dropped into ocean and later picked up by helicopter. Exactly what happened. Stuck. Backside. I was stuck on the backside of the hand. Underwater explosion of some sort. Sound repercussion. This obviously referred to our explosive sound signal to call back our divers. This was a very significant evening. Sherman had not even known he was to be tested, as he had been asked to sit in on the investigation of a well-known medium who, at the last moment, failed to appear due to illness. It was then suggested that Sherman submit to testing in her stead, which he agreed to do. There was no chance for cheating. There was no chance for guessing. Sherman had no way of knowing what had happened to me at sea. I returned from location just in time for the experiment. Sherman did not know anybody in my company or what I was engaged in at that time. A great deal of our shooting was improvised due to weather conditions and other emergencies. Because of a flu epidemic, I had to shoot around my leading man and change plans frequently. Among Sherman's many correct impressions, 3 apparently insignificant words that he scribbled on the first page of his notes were the most meaningful. The words were, shoes off foot. These 3 words didn't mean anything to the observers present, as I did not utter any such words while under hypnosis, but they were firmly etched in my unconsciousness mind as they referred to an incident with certain unpleasant connotations, and I still carried residual bitterness with me. During our shooting procedure, I had a little run-in with our director of photography. It was the first time we ever had exchanged harsh words, and I didn't feel good about it. He had photographed a scene in which the actor was supposed to wear swim fins instead of shoes. After the scene had been photographed, I noticed the actor had worn tennis shoes. When I confronted the camera director in privacy, he assured me that the shoes would not be visible in the frame of the film. I did not accept this explanation and asked him to reshoot the sequence, saying that if he were wrong and the shoes did show, it would be too costly to return to the same location for a retake. He was so sure of himself that he opposed doing this. Nevertheless, I decided to play it safe and order him to reshoot the scene. This he did reluctantly, and there was some tension between us. Unfortunately, there was no way of determining whether the photographer or I was right until the film was developed and projected later. The state of tension still was with me during the telepathic experiment that evening. I did not say anything about the shoes off incident while under hypnosis, yet Sherman immediately picked it up and jotted it on the first page of his notes. No eavesdropping, no spying, no hidden microphones could have given him the information, only the radiations of my subconscious. In fact, no other people who possibly might have mentioned the incident had come in from our shooting location to the city, nor had there been any witness to my heated talk with the camera director. Impressed by this, I reanalyzed Sherman's impressions and found that he sensed the things most accurately which emotionally affected me. Machine gun jamming does not matter much, but when I have to change the shooting schedule, I am upset because the operation is thrown off balance and a great deal of expense is involved. For a producer to redirect a scene or to give instructions to a director is not unusual, but when I said to my very fine director, no, not that way, I was upset because we were on a small boat for that scene and anything I said or did was witnessed by the others. Emotional changes which create tension have a great deal to do with adrenaline, and since that evening, Sherman and I have believed that adrenaline plays some part in certain psychic activities. The more cases we studied, the more it seemed that the sender was usually in a highly excitable condition while the receiver was in a more relaxed condition, whether awake in the twilight zone of consciousness or asleep. In studying the physiology of electric eels, scientists have learned that when in danger, a flow of adrenaline charges tiny cells called electroplasts in the muscle tissue, thus creating an electric charge up to 600 volts. The shock often badly shocks or kills any attacker. What about man? Isn't it possible that when he is in danger or is in an excited state, the flow of adrenaline overcharges the nervous system and the surplus energy emits waves carrying a message of alarm from sender to receiver? Sherman and I are in the process of research into this hypothesis. It is interesting to note that Sherman and I never have lost our extrasensory contact. Many times when I have been ill, he has called me on the phone and told me that he felt uneasy about me. His impression always has been correct. What's more, he has known the nature of my illness. I am constantly impressed by the humility with which Sherman accepts his unusual gift and the fact that he uses it unselfishly to aid research, to give help to others, and to search for a better understanding of still unexplained laws of nature. Chapter 1. The Evidence in Support of E.S.P. Have you ever had a premonition that something was going to happen, and it did? Have you suddenly thought of someone whom you have not had in mind for months or years, only to get a letter or a phone call from that person, or to run into them at an unexpected time and place? Have you received impressions about people which turned out to be correct? Have you had a strong urge to do or not to do something and followed your urge, later finding out that subsequent events proved your urge was right? Have you had a vivid dream or vision of some event which later came to pass? Have you ever thought you saw an apparition or a ghost, the form of someone living but not present, or of someone dead? Have you had the sensation of leaving your body and visiting a distant place, returning with what seemed to be a clear or vague memory of such a visit? Have you ever thought you heard the voice of a departed loved one, giving you a word of warning or giving some assurance that he still lived? Have you felt the invisible presence of some intelligence known or unknown to you? If any of these experiences have been yours, it is possible that you have had a manifestation of what is today called E.S.P. This definitive phrase was originated by Dr. J.B. Ryan, head of the parapsychology department of Duke University and world-famous pioneer investigator of what were formerly called psychic phenomena. Through the years, however, the word psychic had come to mean so many different things, had been misused, and had been brought into such disrepute by fake mediums, fortune tellers, and like charlatans that it no longer commanded respect among scientists and thinking people. Perhaps you have sought to conceal any E.S.P. experiences you may have had for fear friends and acquaintances might classify you as a bit touched in the head. But since the term E.S.P. now has been widely accepted as applying to all phenomena occurring beyond the reach of the 5 physical senses, you need have no reluctance toward ascribing your unusual experiences to it. I will recall my own first adventure with these extended faculties of mine. a dramatic experience which proved conclusively to me the existence of telepathy. Don't turn on the light. I was in my room on the second floor of our family home in Traverse City, Michigan in the year 1915. This room faced west. The sun was setting. It was growing dark. I was at my typewriter and I got up, as I had done hundreds of times before, to turn on the electric light. As I reached for the switch, a voice in my inner ear, not a voice that I heard externally, said, "Don't turn on the light." This was such an unexpected and such an eerie command that I hesitated, wondering why I should get such an impression. Unable to go against this impulse, I returned to my desk and typed for perhaps 10 minutes longer till it grew so dark that I just had to turn on the light. But once more, as I fixed my attention on the electric light bulb with my hand on the switch, the voice within repeated its warning, "Don't turn on the light." At almost the same instant, someone ran up to the porch downstairs and began banging the door and ringing the bell. I went downstairs without turning on the light and was confronted by a linesman who said, "Don't turn on the light. There's a high voltage wire down across your line outside." Young man that I was, I realized that in some way I could not explain, as I had concentrated on the act of turning on the light, I had tuned in on the mind of the linesman. In the past 10 minutes, he had been running to several homes to warn people not to turn on their lights, and in that period of time, his emotionalized thoughts had reached my mind in advance of his physical arrival. The evidence was too specific for this happening to be attributed to chance or coincidence. If I reasoned I have been able to pick up this thought impression, it proves that thought transference is not only possible, that one should be able to repeat it at will once sufficient knowledge of the process involved is gained. This realization started me on what became a lifetime quest, an unceasing desire to discover all I could concerning the mysteries of the mind and to bring mind power under conscious control or direction. I first went to the library to see what literature I could unearth that might throw light on what had happened to me. But in those early days, there was little of an authoritative nature. I did, however, come upon one remarkable book which still stands up today as a classic in its field. It was Thomas J. Hudson's The Law of Psychic Phenomena. This man's knowledge of the function of the mind and the nature of the subconscious was far ahead of his time. Because dependable, demonstrable knowledge of these E.S.P faculties was so generally lacking, I decided that I would have to make a guinea pig of myself, so to speak, and do my own research and experimenting. In my search, as the years passed, it became increasingly obvious that innumerable worlds and planes of being exist beyond the reach of our 5 physical senses, and that our inability to perceive them is no proof that they are not there. Nor could I depend upon my physical senses to report to me the whole truth about anything. Seeing was no longer believing. A chair which had once seemed to me to be absolutely solid was actually composed of billions of moving atoms, continually whirling in their orbits, and I learned that there were spaces between those atoms, comparable to the distances between stars in their orbits, so that the old physics statements that 2 objects could not occupy the same area at the same time could no longer be termed true. I observed that other forms of life have sensory capacities which are much more sensitive in certain areas than those of humans. For example, dogs can hear and respond to the sounds of a whistle, the vibrations of which would not register in the human ear. Birds can sing in a range of sound beyond reach of our hearing. Animals have a sense of smell so keen they can detect the presence of an enemy incredible distances away. The bushman of Australia, still dependent upon his animal instinct, has demonstrated his ability to be aware of the approach of hunters or explorers several days before their arrival. Now doctors and psychiatrists have discovered that sounds we do not hear have profound vibratory effects upon our nervous systems. We are constantly being influenced by forces that are invisible to us and of which we are not consciously aware. The human eye can see only a limited band of color, yet science now knows that an almost infinite range of color combinations exists which we are totally incapable of perceiving. It has taken the development of the telescope, microscope, and X-ray to reveal to us how little we actually know about the universe, without us and within us. We are reminded continually that the air around us is filled with radio and television vibrations, unseen and unheard by us, until we bring them into the range of our sight and hearing by reconverting them back into sounds and images through mechanical means. We are now told that man's body itself is a transmitting and receiving instrument, and science recently suggested the possibility that each body cell contains not only an identity and specific function, but also is a recorder of everything that happens to it. It is therefore conceivable that an intelligence beyond our comprehensions pervades all forms of life, from the infinitesimally small to the infinitely large. Man in the mighty universe. Scientists are asking, where does the material from which we are made come from? They have evidence that matter simply appears. It is created. At one moment, different atoms comprising the material do not exist, and at a later time, they do. Astronomers pretty well agree that creation is continually going on. They estimate that in the observable universe alone, what might be termed new matter is being created at the rate of 100 million tons per second. This stupendous creativity implies the existence of an expanding universe in which new galaxies are constantly being formed. Today, it is an accepted fact that we exist in a universe which contains hundreds of billions of stars. Each star has a sun, in most cases far mightier than our own. Around these suns revolve countless planets, and many may contain intelligent life comparable to our own, or higher forms of evolution beyond our remotest comprehension. In the face of this knowledge, we must concede that we are still but in the kindergarten of a vast universe school of life expression and development. The mind of man only recently began to be aware of such cosmic events and to seek its place in the creative scheme of things. It is significant that from earliest recorded time, all concepts of God have come about through a belief in the supernatural. What primitive man was not able to explain in the workings of nature, he attributed to a mysterious power far greater than he. To appease this power and to seek its favor, he offered sacrifices of his prized possessions, even members of his own species. He also established worshipful rituals and ceremonies and prostrated himself, with many lamentations and confessions of his sinful shortcomings in the hope of escaping vengefulness. Gradually, these crude superstitious attempts grew into religious cults presided over by witch doctors who became the early priests. Superstition and mythology then combined to pass down to succeeding generations concepts born of fear and ignorance, the remnants of which we are still found in the hell and damnation of some of our religions today. Intermingled, however, with dogmas and creeds in these various religions, so-called pagan and Christian, have been accounts of apparent supernatural happenings, risen saviors, the healing of lepers, raisings from the dead, the appearance of angels, the voice of God, the translation of saint-like individuals, dreams and visions purported to be of divine origin, physical miracles such as the changing of water into wine and the multiplying of loaves of bread, and here and there evidences of true spiritual inspiration. Without this belief in the metaphysical, whether based originally on genuine phenomena or not, no religion ever would have been formed. It would seem, therefore, that in this modern day, when science is blasting superstition and ignorance out of existence, all followers of all religions should be concerning themselves with proving the reality of the spiritual powers which they profess to believe. Such proof can be found only in and through the manifestation of what is now called E.S.P faculties in man. If these powers actually do exist, and the evidence that they do exist is overwhelming, then their study and development by science is the most important exploration that can be engaged in upon this planet. It far overshadows the value of all investigations we can make of outer space and other worlds. It provides the answer to man's problem, O Earth, to his real nature and his relationship to his Creator. But where do we stand at present as concerns this knowledge? What has been done and what remains to be done to regain a reliable comprehension of these higher powers and the way to make practical use of them? How E.S.P investigation began. Genuine scientific investigation of psychic phenomena was not undertaken until less than 100 years ago. In the year 1882, a group of Cambridge men founded the English Society for Physical Research. In France, the Institut Metaphysique International was formed with a similar objective: to examine the evidence of occult happenings and to try to determine the nature and origin of such manifestations. Both organizations encountered intense opposition from 19th century skeptics and scoffers who poked both criticism and fun at them for dabbling in spooks. Not long after, the American Society for Physical Research was established, and all three groups have been active ever since, contributing immeasurably to the now rapidly expanding knowledge of mind and its E.S.P's potentialities. Many notable investigators have served these psychic research societies in all three countries, men of science who courageously placed their reputations on the line in giving support to this new science of the mind at a time when public acceptance of such phenomena was almost nil. The occurrence of so-called supernatural happenings was not denied so much as it was interpreted to the work of the devil. This despite the fact that all religions have been based upon belief in spiritual revelations and divine guidance. Then, to add to the confusion and encourage the opposition, many magicians and charlatans purported to perform genuine psychic phenomena when it was out and out fakery and trickery. Under these conditions, it was not surprising that an uninformed, often hoodwinked, and inexperienced public should have scoffed at the existence of extended mental faculties. It was all the more difficult for men of science, men of an impeccable character, to place this field of exploration upon a foundation of authority and respectability. Among those who have made distinguished contributions to the present knowledge of E.S.P. are, from England, Sir Oliver Lodge, Sir William Crookes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Lord Balfour, Lord Haldane, Professor H.H. Price, Professor F.W.H. Myers, Professor C.D. Broad, Henry Sidgwick, J.W. Doon, S.G. Soule, S.H. Saltmarsh, Edmund Gurney, Theodore Besterman, G.N.M. Terrell, Watley Currington. From France, Camille Flammarion, Dr. Charles Richard, Dr. Alice Carrel, Dr. Eugene Osty. From the United States, Professor William James, Dr. Walter Franklin Prince, Dr. Morton Prince, Dr. James Hyslop, Dr. Herward Carrington, Uptown Sinclair, Professor William McDougall, Dr. J.B. Ryan, and Dr. Gardner Murphy. Many books have been written on the work of these investigators, and thousands of case histories have been examined and evaluated. The reports of the physical research journals and bulletins also contain voluminous information on proceedings and are obtainable in libraries in many cities. It is not my purpose in this book to provide an encyclopedia of past investigative work, however important it has been. Rather, I will treat the subject from the point of view of my own experiences and experiments, what they have revealed to me on how you may gain like results. During the course of my life, I've had a wide variety of authenticated E.S.P. experiences, some consciously induced and others unsought, all because I have spent years endeavoring to develop a greater sensitivity of mind and have been open and receptive to impressions which might have come to me from beyond the five physical senses, thoughts that traveled thousands of miles. In the fall of 1937 and the spring of 1938, the opportunity was provided for me to test such powers through a series of experiments in long-distance telepathy with the Arctic explorer Sir Hubert Wilkins. At that time, Sir Hubert had been assigned by the Soviet government to outfit an expedition and to fly north from New York City in search of a crew of lost Soviet airmen who had been trying to fly nonstop from the Soviet Union over the North Pole to the United States. This plane had been forced down some 200 miles this side of the pole. Its radio had gone dead, and the Russians, thinking the flyers still might be alive in the Arctic waste, had instituted a search for them. I had met Sir Hubert as a co-member of the City Club, and he had told me of different unexplainable premonitions he had throughout his life, stating his conviction that the greatest unexplored area yet left to man is the area of his own mind. This mutuality of interest led to the idea of the telepathic experiment. Sir Hubert suggested that he would keep mental appointments with me 3 nights a week, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, from 11:30 to midnight, Eastern Standard Time, and that he would synchronize this difference in time as he flew farther north. He would be the sender, acting as the receiver. I was to sit quietly in my study at the times designated and make my mind receptive by a technique I had developed through years of private experimentation. I would record such impressions as came to me. It was thought wise to arrange for unbiased observation of my recordings. Dr. Gardner Murphy, then head of the Parapsychology Department of Columbia University, agreed to witness my material. Since the tests were not being conducted in a laboratory, he could not evaluate them as a whole, but when the 5.5-month series of tests was concluded, Dr. Murphy testified by affidavit that I had methodically sent to him each night by mail, protected by government postmark, copies of all impressions I had received. Other witnesses to these experiments were Dr. A.E. Strath Gordon, brain surgeon with the British government during the First World War, and authority on extrasensory perception, Dr. Henry S. W. Hardwick, research officer for the Psychic Research Society of New York, Reginald Iverson, chief shortwave radio operator for the New York Times, and Sam Emery, lay memory of the City Club. When the experiments were concluded and checked against Wilkins' diary and log, it was found that of the hundreds of impressions recorded during the test period, some 70% of them were correct. The testimony of Reginald Iverson is worthy of repetition here. He said in his affidavit, reproduced in the book, Thoughts Through Space, "This is to certify that I, Reginald Iverson, radio operator for the New York Times, was in contact with Harold Sherman off and on during the period of his telepathic test with Dr. Sir Herbert Wilkins. It had been thought that some of Sherman's impressions could be checked by shortwave with Wilkins and thus expedite the report on the test, but magnetic and sunspot conditions were so bad during this entire time that I was unable to communicate with Sir Herbert Wilkins except on a comparatively few occasions. One Monday evening, February 21st, 1938, my wife and I visited Harold Sherman in his home and were present in his study at 380 Riverside Drive, New York City, when he was receiving impressions from Sir Herbert Wilkins, and at that time, Mr. Sherman recorded the impression that Sir Herbert Wilkins was trying to get some messages through to me by shortwave radio. I was dubious that this was so because Wilkins knew that the next 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, were my regular days off duty at the Times, and he rarely tried to contact me when he was certain that I was not on the job. But I learned the following morning that those messages had been received the night before by our night operator at the Times, who had tried to reach me by phone, and that the messages contained additional information which Harold Sherman had also telepathically received and recorded in my presence. At no time during this period of 6 months did Harold Sherman ever seek such information as I might have known concerning Sir Herbert Wilkins and his activities in the far north. In fact, despite my skepticism, as it turned out, Sherman actually had a more accurate telepathic knowledge of what was happening to Wilkins in his search for the lost Russian flyers than I was able to gain in my ineffective attempts to keep in touch by shortwave radio. Since these tests, which were considered pioneering in their day, scientific as well as lay interest in E.S.P has been constantly increasing. Today, radio and television programs have been devoted to dramatizations of authenticated cases, and parapsychology laboratories throughout the world are conducting experiments. Many books and articles have been written covering various phases of mental phenomena as related to such fields as physiology, physics, chemistry, biology, neurology, psychology, psychiatry, and medicine. A study of the mind of man is at last beginning to get the attention it has long deserved. The fact that man ultimately finds no permanent security and satisfaction in worldly achievements and the mere attainment of powers and riches indicates that his 5 physical senses are not adequate to meet the experiences of his world. Could man activate, develop, and use the E.S.P faculties he possesses, he would then discover his relationship to a higher power and will receive the guidance and the wisdom he needs to live peacefully with himself and his fellow man. Every human being can live closer to the higher power. Great thinkers have left their marks upon civilization, contributing ideas and enlightenment which have continued to serve mankind. Such minds have been illumined from within, as all minds could be illumined in accordance with their degrees of intelligence, once attuned to this higher power. Followers of spiritual leaders such as Zoroaster, Latois, Buddha, Muhammad, Confucius, Moses, Christ, and others have been led to believe that they cannot individually attain the aspired enlightenment and nature of their teachers. This feeling of disparity between the leader and his followers has been a most tragic deterrent to spiritual development and advancement. Most of these followers do not believe that they are endowed with the same God-given powers as their teachers. Could they realize that they actually do possess the same potentiality for spiritual development, millions upon millions of human beings would find release in and through them a higher power that will raise immeasurably the quality and character of human life on this earth. Happily, there are now indications that some modern spiritual leaders are beginning to stress the importance of self-knowledge and the need for the individual to give thought to his own inner development. Atomic scientists have created a Frankenstein which they fear, once out of hand, can destroy all life on this planet. So we see that man is equipped through the creativity of his own mind with weapons of total destructive power. He lacks as yet the mass awareness and development of the one power that can save him from himself. Those who understand the laws of mind know this to be true because in the realm of mind, like always attracts like. Reduced to one emphatic statement, hate always attracts hate, and love always attracts love. Every spiritual leader throughout all time has declared the power of love and warned against the exercise of hate. As human creatures, we have refused to take these admonitations to heart. Were this not so, the world, centuries ago, would have become a harmonious abode for all life upon it. Extra credit. Check what you've learned in Chapter 1. At some time in your life, probably many times, you almost certainly use your ESP. It happens, for instance, when you have a hunch, when you feel strongly guided to do something or not to do it, or when you feel you're being visited by someone not physically present. There seems no doubt that we have perceptions beyond the 5 physical senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. Science shows us our bodies have more space in them than solid matter. Being made of atoms, and that is reality. We and everything else is made of vibrations. Perhaps then our bodies can respond to other vibrations not perceived by our physical senses. ESP probably accounts for the origins of religion. It has been a complete mystery until recently, and much of the mystery remains, although scientific methods have been applied to ESP during the past 100 years. A carefully controlled experiment appears to show that thoughts can travel through thousands of miles from mind to mind. Our thoughts make us what we are. There is a great law of mind. Like attracts like. Thus love attracts love. Hate attracts hate.